So myself, I've been, this is my one and only good side. Cheers, Anita. For those of you who don't know, I work with Anita currently, maybe not next week, but we'll see. I joined what was Abbey National back in 1998. So whilst I've been with the organisation for several years, it doesn't feel that, because you may recall that in 2004 this Spanish bank kind of arrived. I think the press referred to it as the new Spanish Armada. I think that was the Daily Mail. I might have quoted that wrong, but in terms of the paper, but there was this whole new influx of this Spanish bank coming into the UK. In 2008, we then acquired Bradford & Bingley, literally in a weekend. And not hell-bent on just doing one acquisition, we decided that we'd do Alliance and Leicester at the same time. And so I was fortunate to work as a consultant in L&D at that time, and I was involved heavily, along with Anita and a couple of other colleagues, in that integration. And so then, when as a result of the integration, we finally earned the right to take on the Santander name, we rebranded in 2010 and became Santander UK. And that was an important milestone for us, because Santander was an acquisition of Abbey in 2004, and if you may remember, it was a very red Abbey brand from our very primary colour brand. If you remember, we had reds, pinks and greens and flowing writing and lower text. That was an interesting era. And so through the acquisition, driving a standard, and through consolidation, it was about a stress test ultimately for those three brands to come together as one culture under Santander. And in 2010, that's when we acquired the name. So it's a little potted history. I just want you to remember that briefly as a backdrop as I go through the past, and some 6 key lessons I think that I've taken away along that journey. The first and foremost was partnerships. Now, when you're integrating 10,000 people across different organisations, so about 5,000 in Bradford & Bingley, 5 in A&L, and ultimately that's into the 5,000 that are in Abbey. That's 15,000 people that are being thrown into turmoil in the space of 12 to 18 months, who previously, up to the Friday before, were competitors. On the Monday now they have to work together. Brilliant. It's quite a cultural journey that you're going on. And so I quickly realised, observing how A&L was being run and how Bradford & Bingley projects are being run, that partnership was key. And I think on one of those, I'll not claim which one, but a seat at that table as a true HR partner during business transformation was our most effective time, I think. So for me, partnerships, and as we go into the future a bit later on, just keep that in your mind about partnerships as we start to innovate at pace. The second one was around observing results. We talk in this new modern era about test and learn, and iteration and agile thinking. But previously, we used to do things called pilots. But I don't know about your organisation. Was a pilot a true pilot? Or was it just a thing that you did before rollout that everybody ignored and tried to tweak the results to prove and justify the month's worth of work? And I think observation of results is critical, again, through many failures in the past where perhaps we've not listened to the implementation of an L&D offering and not listened to the feedback that's coming through has been one of our downfalls. You know, for many a year in Santander and in Abbey, our happy sheets used to be in paper. And those happy sheets used to sit in a pigeonhole for a consultant maybe to have a look at. So we were bothering to ask our people what they thought about our courses, but we were paying lip service ultimately to doing something about it. And they would stack up. And so very quickly I think we've come to realise that observing the results and the impact of our training and doing something about it was phenomenally important. The third one was around old and new. I referred to it earlier. I'm sure we've all been on that bandwagon, maybe not just me, where you chase that shiny new object, e-learning, or a new serious game, or an app, or the next LMS because it's number one. We chase those shiny things, it's human nature. And sometimes in my history, we've perhaps made the wrong choices around the wrong channels, put a lot into e-learning and forced people to click next at a machine. And we've all had that e-learning. Some of it might already still exist in your organisations. I know I'm thinking the way I pause because I think it's still in ours as well, unfortunately, at the minute. But this merge of old architecture and new architecture, and when we talk about blended learning, don't just think about the blend of media, but the blend of experience, where probably one of the most phenomenal pieces of innovative technology most of you are still choosing to use, which is a pen and a piece of paper. You know, we don't lose sight of convenience, the simplicity of things in trying to chase digital. Why aren't you all writing on tablets right now? Because it's just easier. It never runs out of battery. You can turn the corner over so you can bookmark it. You can always pick up from where you've left off. You can read it in any 24/7, any walk of life. It's a phenomenal invention, and I think tech has maybe, in my mind, drawn my attention off ultimately what truly matters. Working through acquisitions, it was about efficiency, cost control, and risk management. And so actually investment in growth wasn't an option. And so when you're trying to drive an L&D agenda to realise the bank of the future back then, we weren't going to get a brand new state-of-the-art learning management system. I wasn't going to get a phenomenal contract. What we did have was an ailing SharePoint platform that nobody was using. And so in 2009, a couple of us, when my first child was on its way and I needed to be out of the house, I taught myself how to code. And we built Learning at Santander, a brand new, fresh learning portal, which still exists today. It's probably 2 years over its shelf life at the minute. But we made do with what we had, because we had a vision about driving a new learning experience. But instead of getting lost and procrastinating in what IT couldn't do for us, we realised very quickly just to work with the tools that were at hand. And again, as I'm working into the future now with Santander Learning, that's still prevalent, working with what you've got. Equally around the same time, we had this epiphany. We had a guy come in as a guest speaker from Goo, those chocolate tubs that are really cool. He sold the business now. But one of his key business models was around standing out from the crowd. And so we very quickly realigned, actually, what's our L&D brand and who are our competitors? And instead of looking at the Barclays and the Lloyds and the HSBCs of this world, who our employees had no option to go and experience their L&D, so why was I benchmarking against those worlds? Actually, the benchmark is the consumer brands. The emergence of, back in 2009, an iPad didn't exist, but we had Infinity Broadband on its way, and now what we've got is Netflix and Sky Q and all this consumer-grade media that is driving a social norm. That's, in my view, our competitive landscape. That's what should we, as a learning experience, be competing against, because that's what each and every one of you will most likely be using in your walk of life. And so why isn't it the same expectation to have that of your L&D services? And then finally, the sixth lesson, especially when we're working with what you've got to be bold, you've got to be curious, and above all, I learnt to experiment. Because funnily enough, the first time I experimented, I thought I was being naughty. I thought we were going to get fired. And then nobody noticed. And then they liked the output of the experiment. My biggest achievement of an experiment to this date is the learning platform that we're still using called Learning at Santander, built on SharePoint. Nobody asked for it. Nobody wanted it. I built it over a summer, taught myself to code, and it's still the learning portal now, out of an experiment. That could have easily failed. Somebody might not have liked it. But it was nonetheless an experiment. And from that day forward, we've encourage this ethos of experimentation, obviously within confined frameworks. We work for a bank. Security is really important, and risk management. So there are frameworks to work within, but don't ever feel contrived and restricted just because of economics and macro environments. So that's where we've gone through. So those 6 key lessons. So where we're at the minute, 2 things in this regard. This is a little world I created a few months back. We've just gone through probably our biggest HR transformation ever. So if we're on this, you saw the video, the future is here and now, it's big, it's bold, and so what we decided to do to give people choice in the HR function, and particularly in the L&D function, is we started again from a blank sheet of paper. Now that meant lots of displacement, at-risk and redundancies, myself included, displacing yourself during a restructure. It was a very strange feeling. But it was important, because if we were going to invest in the future, we had to do it properly. And so what we're looking for in terms of digital skills is that this stuff on here isn't just for the little tech geek squad who sits on the side of a department or a partnership. In our view now moving forward, this should become our staple terminology. As commonplace as you talk about a workbook, or a face-to-face classroom, or an experiential event, or 70-20-10, and some of the new fads coming through, actually all of this and more should be part of our common language. Not necessarily in our teams to be experts in them, but to be aware of the art of the possible, that by combining some of these things can create something quite amazing as a learning solution. So one, technical awareness. And then when we talk about digital skills, what are we looking for in people? Because you don't get born with digital skills. We talk about digital natives, but what is it about them? And for me, looking at my children and how they're learning, things that stand out is this curiosity, this experimentation. I'm going to touch this iPad until I figure out how it works. And then lo and behold, my 2-year-old is in YouTube, he's finding things, and before I know it, he's watching some BBC drama on dinosaurs roam the earth or something. How on earth he found that, I don't know. But it's through experimentation. So when we're looking at some of the attributes, capabilities in our teams, these are some of the words that have been resonated and bubbling around. And so we've got 7 new hires coming into the learning function at the minute. They're about to start, and these are, when we were interviewing, were some of the traits and attributes we were looking for. The biggest of all is this sense making. In a big, unstructured world, how do you start to take things that ordinarily look unstructured and make sense of it along with your clear vision? That's very difficult. There's lots of things that you could piece together. How to make sense of that and see something is really important. You might not understand how to make that happen, but having that vision of putting those components together is really important. And so, a couple of things that we're focused on right now, or several things. Agile thinking, it's been around for ages, but apparently now it's the whole new norm. You know, this linear waterfall approach of doing things in a very methodical way and taking months to do things isn't the agile world that we're working within. And so we're very clearly now trying to do this test and learn, iterate on the fly, make mistakes, fail fast, that kind of thing, and recover. Because failure is expected, and it's understandable, certainly within L&D. So let's do that. Let's run at pace. Let's not be afraid of failure. Let's do it in a controlled fashion, but let's not procrastinate and get death by committee, where ideas go to die. Let's go and do it. Let's experiment. Let's use agile methodology. We're also looking at the competence of the organisation. Believe it or not, Santander doesn't have a single set of competency dictionaries for the organisation. We don't have one common language. We will do shortly, but equally, in the L&D function, we didn't have clarity as to what the competencies were that we're looking for. Likewise, challenge yourselves when you look at your competency frameworks, how future-proof are they? You know, when we're talking about communication, and you're talking about, I'm sure we've all drawn that pie chart with 7% and 3% tone and 55% body language and all that kind of stuff. But does that translate to Twitter and 144 characters and building rapport in that medium channel? So at the minute we're focusing on trying to future-proof our competencies because that future is going to be here rapidly so. This picture was to depict neurology. You know, neuroscience is here. We have genuine data and science that tells us how people learn and pay attention and deal and absorb life. But how many of us are still quoting models that might have been done in the 1930s and 1940s? They are relevant and have frame of reference, but certainly in our L&D skill set in Santander, how up to date we were with some of the latest neuroscience thinking is probably lacking. And so a little bit of focus right now is what we're on right now. Mobile. We thought mobile was the future. Actually, 2009 this iPad arrived. We're way behind the times. If we're not doing a lot of mobile learning right now, and that is a mobile-first ethos, where most of our content is going out through these devices, then we're already behind the times. Now, we've predicted in Santander there will come a time when the wonderful guys in IT will flick a switch and Wi-Fi will land in Santander and mobile devices. But that was just aspiration. It'll never happen. Last year they did. We've got Wi-Fi everywhere. We've got 8,000 smart devices suddenly arrived. And now I've got an L&D team that are going, if only we'd have been mobile ready. People could have accessed all this learning that we've got on their devices. So we're rapidly trying to catch up very, very quickly. So tools that we're using there is typical stuff like Articulate Storyline, but also Gomo, have you come across Gomo as a web authoring tool? Very simple, but this whole responsive. But also for web design, a good tool that we've come across is Webflow. So Webflow.io, really good for like WYSIWYG kind of semi-decent web design, quite challenging to use initially. But once you've got the hang of it and you understand basic web design, it's a really powerful tool because it does all the hard work for you. Not forget social and the power of the crowd and this whole curation of content. Actually, we're not the custodians anymore of knowledge. I shudder when I walk around some of our training rooms and I still see a contractor at the front and they've papered the walls with lots of flip chart because they're the custodian of all things great and wonderful. Actually, that's not the world anymore because we can find things out on Google and loads of other places. So power of the crowd is something that we're really focusing on right now, and how we bring that community, a 20,000 strong workforce. How do we repurpose a number of those to be our L&D offering moving forward, our L&D community. We're also looking at this. I like this picture. Because all this is all brilliant, but unless you delight the user, unless you really focus on the user experience, then it's all for nothing. You can have the most eloquent paragraphs in the world, but we've all been there, if it's behind the most rubbish interface ever, or it's just cumbersome to get, you get disengagement. We're not bothered by that. Because remember, the competitive landscape is things like Sky Q, Netflix, Amazon Prime, this ability to order something on your phone and then it's dropped off at a locker. It's not all about digital, this whole immersive blend of old and new. User experience and delighting the user in terms of visual design is just as important. I'm sure you guys working in L&D, you'll get frustrated in the old workbook. When you're looking at a workbook and there's not alignment, when the title doesn't quite align with the first paragraph and the picture's all, what's that all about? So we've done that many a year. The same applies for digital. Anybody using these things? Clearly I am. Not really at all. This isn't mine because that's far too active for my step tracker. Far too active. You're now in a world as consumers where this is at your fingertips. Challenge yourselves, again, if you like Santander, could you get the same level of data about the learning and development that your team and your people are doing in your organisation? Because if they can get this quantified self about every other form of life that they're operating in, yet in learning we can't really tell them whether they've started a course, where they are in it, or whether they've properly completed it and to what satisfactory level, then we're already behind the curve of expectation. So again, we're focusing massively on how do we get this kind of level. And of course, because I work for a bank, security and privacy is fundamentally important. But not just for a bank. We've all seen the talk stuff. We've all seen it hit in the press, lots of other areas about cybercrime and stuff. The more data you gather about people, the more you use that data to profile people, the more challenging and restrictive those contract negotiations come when you're trying to onboard a brand new supplier, because you're going to give them your name and your email address, and before you know it, you're getting server specs of their latest server farm just to make sure that it's wholly secure in case somebody tries to raid it with a bulldozer, right? Data is primary content. It's real resource that we need to keep secure. And so very rapidly within L&D circles, we're really having to get our teams to think about the security and the integrity of otherwise, to them, is non-sensitive data. I'm not talking about customer accounts. I'm just talking about your email address and your name being in the cloud. It's high personal sensitive data that has to be secured. So we're on a big learning curve about that cyber security. And so, just to wrap up, because I'm conscious you want to get home and the sun's shining, and by the time you get out of here it's going to be raining, I bet. Sod's law, innit? Let's talk about the future. So if that's all here and now, and that's the exhaustive work that Santander L&D are just kind of thinking, blank sheet of paper, we've got to kind of tie a bow around this because that's just got to be our normal world now, on top of everything we've already done, like workbooks face-to-face and all that kind of stuff, then what's to come? So the canvas. So this is, have a look at it, it's available on YouTube, it's from Corning. This is a thing called smart glass. It's still a concept at the minute, but you imagine a world at the minute, we talk about smartphones and iPads, that's a learning canvas. A workbook paper is a learning canvas. But if you start to open your minds and think beyond that, what else could be a learning canvas? It doesn't have to be a digital device, it doesn't have to be a bathroom mirror with integrated smart technology, but it will be here soon. You know, this is round the corner. So is our learning content ready for a whole new set of learning canvases? Or is it still confined to being housed in that little LMS that can only be accessed on an IE11 browser through a desktop machine because it can't work on any other canvas? Or when you've got to be inside the organisation because we don't do 24/7 access? Because if that's it, we're basically saying you can only ever breathe in life in this little room. It's not right. And so these canvases, whatever they are, they're going to change. But definitely have a look up Corning on YouTube, Smart Glass. I think it's a day made of glass. It's phenomenal. The next one, touchless interface. If you watch any of the youngsters coming through now, yes, they're a demon when it comes to texting. I'm not sure what it is because it's just hieroglyphics and things don't actually say words anymore. But how often did they talk to Siri or Cortana or say, hey Google, can you look this up for me? This whole notion of talking to a device and getting an answer. Again, we talk about bite size and nugget learning and all this micro learning, but how ready is that for a touchless interface? How ready, should it happen, which will be imminent, I'm sure, is that content? Or are we saying that in a year or 18 months' time, when this kind of voice recognition technology becomes mainstream in an LMS, are we saying, oh, but to deploy that, we're going to have to overhaul that 300 assets just to work with that API? We need to be thinking about nuggets and micro learning for this world. It might not be here right now, but it's imminent. So touchless interface. Recognize any of these? So this is the Google car. This driverless one. You imagine getting a car, it's going to drive itself. This is a drone taxi, which hasn't got FAA approval at the minute, but that's the only thing really stopping it. And this is the thing called Hyperloop, which is this thing that's going to get you from San Francisco to somewhere else within 30 minutes because you're going to travel at 700 mile an hour in a tube. And it's being built in a desert at the minute as a test, as an experiment, just to prove concept. This isn't anything, you might be looking at it going, why on earth's Rob gone off into transportation? The reason being, because if we look at a parallel, if we look at Netflix, Sky Q, these parallel and think about what they're doing to improve our consumer world, what is it that's going to have an impact on L&D? And this, for me, I've titled convenience. If you don't have to think about driving, you don't have to think about the traffic, you don't have to think about your commute, which is probably on a lot of your minds right now. How much time a week is that giving you back in your life to fill with something else? How far away is that? So if that video is talking about what's happened in the last 10 years, could you imagine in the next 10 years, if we reconvene as a reunion in 9 years' time, is this just common? That you've all arrived here in a little autonomous hub that's just driven you there? And how much time in your life you've got back and what you're going to do with that time? So this level of convenience, again, if your learning like ours is locked behind a firewall, it's contradictory to a new social norm that's coming about. This next one, augmented and virtual reality. You may have seen them if you went to the Learning Tech. There was a stand with a couple of Oculus Rift. I'm not sure how they're going to use it, but it's pretty cool tech. So you can immerse yourself. But it's not just about putting a headset on and working in a virtual world, but this augmented reality. Things like HoloLens and Google Glass, which will make a reappearance probably in the next 18 months. This thing of, you talk about it in a weird way, we talk about 70-20-10, the 70 being the workplace. Imagine using tech to augment that workplace. So you're getting these little overlays that are bringing that workplace, that classroom to life through tech. So again, if you don't like Santander, you're probably still wrestling with 70-20-10 and orchestrating a workplace experience to drive and elicit the learning agenda that you want. But you imagine when this has become mass consumer grade tech, how you could then digitize that. So again, our L&D is figuring out how best to structure the workplace so that we're ready to augment it where we want to. Now you can augment now with your phones and your phone camera. So you don't need to wait for these headsets. So it's here and now and the tech exists. So, we've got to think about that. So when they're talking about future, this is probably in the next 12 months. Scary. This one, artificial intelligence. I'm not talking Terminator, I'm not talking end of the world and nuclear war, but this exists, this thing called Watson. Have a look It's phenomenal. Artificial intelligence isn't a sentient being. It's not going to have a conversation. It's just a very clever computer who is able to take ordinarily unstructured data and make sense of it. A very human intellect, a human trait. They're also programming Watson at the minute to have emotional sensitivity, so it can start to detect sarcasm and stuff. Why is this important? In learning, you imagine a day when your LMS, maybe in the next 3 years, is intelligent enough to understand the context of where you are. We talk about point-in-time learning, just in time. What if, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility, that your learning management system is so context-aware and so intelligent that it knows just what you need because it knows where you are, what you're doing and what you're about to do, and based on your profile and what it knows about you, what your weaknesses are. So it might just be prompting you going, hey, Anita, you don't have those courageous conversations normally, but maybe there's this little bite-sized learning piece that you could do. So again, how relevant is your content? How pertinent is it? So how micro, and how is it tagged, and how ready is it for something else to pick it up? Now that doesn't have to be a machine, it could be a fellow human being, but it's context sensitivity. And the last one is biometrics. This is cool, this is happening now. I'm not talking about you all being implanted with a chip. You already have unique identifiers of a fellow human being, which is your iris, your voice print, your fingerprint. HSBC are just launching voice recognition for your app security, for your banking. It's unique to you. So when we're talking about personalization and accessing content that is relevant and personal to you, it's not just about an e-number or an employee number and a password anymore. How ready are we for hyper-personalized content that's delivered because the system knows you because of who you are, because of your biometrics? Now this isn't science fiction. If you've got an iPad 2 Air or an iPhone 6 Plus, it's that little button on the bottom that unlocks when you touch it because it just knows your thumbprint. Or if you're all like mine, ask you for your password because it never recognizes my thumbprint, right? But it's here. And the reason for me mentioning all of this is because if we think about that future and we think about the parallels, what do we need to be doing now to get our content and our services and our experiences ready so that when this becomes mass adoption, we're just there and we're keeping pace with the world and we're not seen as an outmoded, outdated function which we want to outsource because there's some really cool tech startup that's just done this, of which I'm sure there's some of you in the room thinking, stop talking because this is my business model for the next 5 years. This isn't something for the geek squads to be doing. This is something that we need to be thinking about now. How to get this now is to work in partnership with really good startups, in my experience. Find people who are ready to do this now, experiment with it, be bold, be curious, and just have a go. And that's it for today.